This podcast was written and created by Avi Melamed, Middle East intelligence analyst and founder of the Inside the Middle East Institute.
Welcome to The Debate. Today we're looking at the really intense internal Arab commentary that followed the recent ceasefire. And what this commentary immediately showed were these fundamentally clashing views on the conflict's outcome and, maybe most critically, on Hamas's performance. The material reveals, well, a pretty stark division between those championing Hamas's actions as steadfastness, samud, and those who condemn the movement for what they see as reckless leadership and, frankly, moral evasion. So the central question that emerges is this: does the overall Arab analysis lean towards celebrating Hamas's strategic success, its perseverance, or does it actually voice a sharp demand for accountability, one rooted in the empirical devastation we saw? I'll argue that the narrative of steadfast resistance holds significant political weight.
And I'll argue that the critique, the one focused on catastrophic failure and the urgent need for accountability, forms a far more compelling and I'd say necessary perspective for the region's future.
Right. So the steadfast narrative, it immediately framed this conflict as a definitive show of Palestinian strength. You have commentators like Hussein al-Qarra arguing that Hamas actually achieved clear political and moral victories, despite the horrific suffering. They see the release of hostages as, well, a relatively minor tactical concession in the bigger picture. Mohammed Abdi was very explicit, stating quite plainly that Gaza has triumphed, forcing negotiations, reshaping regional deterrence in a way. For this camp, the suffering itself is somehow transformed into proof of perseverance, of dignity, achieving something where Arab armies in the past had faltered.
Mm-hmm. But that framing, it seems to me, fundamentally relies on elevating symbolism over the grim reality on the ground. I believe that narrative really does propagate what some are calling imaginary victories. Ibrahim Nur al-Din argues quite forcefully that this kind of populism has cost Palestinians their future. He actually claims that the actions of October 7th effectively buried the prospect of a Palestinian state for maybe the next 70 years. And when you see someone like Abdul Rahman al-Rashid condemning this as the propaganda of victories, he's calling that whole moral victory idea hollow. He even draws parallels to Hezbollah's own sort of cyclical delusions after 2006, rightly pointing out that this rhetoric just masks the sheer scale of destruction.
Okay, but that perspective seems to rely almost solely on measuring success by the physical cost, the destruction. We also have to look at the political currency that was gained. Now, acknowledging the costs is crucial, of course, but the political gains might demonstrate a strategic impact that, well, transcends a purely military assessment of defeat. We see commentators, for instance, Nabil al-Jubaili, linking this struggle directly to the recent push we've seen for European recognition of a Palestinian state. That suggests the resistance did successfully galvanize global public opinion, perhaps creating significant political leverage.
I have to fundamentally disagree that this leverage, if it exists in the way you describe, is rooted in Hamas's strength. Maymoun al-Fandi makes a compelling point, I think, arguing that the international ripple effect you cite isn't really about respect for the movement. It's based more on Western leaders' fear of domestic political backlash within their own countries. The critical camp, the one I'm representing here, grounds its arguments in tangible reality. Look at Samir Adali. He notes very pointedly that Hamas turned the flood of Al-Aqsa, which was the intended name, right, meant to signal success, into the flood of Gaza, the catastrophic result. The critique is that they essentially abandoned their people, leading to undeniable military failure.
But isn't political survival itself perhaps the highest form of strategic victory, especially when the opposing side's stated objective was the movement's complete annihilation? The very fact of political continuity seems to speak directly to the perseverance lauded by the Samud camp.
Well, the core issue, I believe, remains accountability. And this is where the critical position really finds its strongest footing. Just consider the symbolic significance, and it was widely discussed, of Hamas leader Musa Abu Marzak terminating that interview when he was pressed on whether the devastation was truly worth the price. That single act kind of encapsulates the movement's fundamental refusal, it seems, to engage in self-scrutiny or accept responsibility. And Mohammed Kawatz faults Hamas specifically for not heeding the key lesson from Nasrallah's own admission after 2006 regarding, unforeseen consequences. So the critical camp, anchored as it is in ethical reasoning and empirical facts, resonates with a far clearer moral position, I would argue, while the steadfast narrative tends to lean more heavily on symbolism and perhaps emotional loyalty.
What the conflict exposed then is this profound split politically, culturally. On one side, you have a perspective deeply rooted in a political tradition that validates endurance, validates sacrifice as a necessary, if incredibly costly, means of liberation. And, well, that ensures Hamas survives politically and perhaps morally within a large and influential segment of Arab thought.
And the opposing moral universe demands accountability. It demands a hard reckoning with reality, precisely to break this tragic, repeating loop of destruction. This whole debate, I think, also highlights how sometimes misplaced Western sympathy, by maybe absolving Hamas of responsibility or mistakenly framing it purely as a standard nationalist movement, can paradoxically become a kind of boomerang, ultimately harming the very Palestinians it aims to defend.
So, what we're left with is this immense chasm. Two diverging moral universes operating within Arab political thought, both absolutely committed to defining the ultimate meaning, the lasting legacy of this conflict's outcome.
This podcast is made possible by supporters like you. ITME is an independent nonprofit institute committed to apolitical, intelligence-based Middle East education.
To learn more or to support our work, visit our website www.insidethemiddle-east.com.